The insurance company denied his $200,000 claim. They said the damage wasn't covered. He had photos. He had proof. But it took one question from a judge to expose everything. The fire started just after 2:10 a.m. Thomas Grayson woke up to the sound of something cracking. Not loud, not explosive, just wrong. A deep, splintering sound that didn't belong in the quiet of a Kentucky winter night. By the time he reached the hallway, smoke was already pressing against the ceiling. His house wasn't extravagant. 2 stories, built by his father in 1983. Hardwood floors Thomas refinished himself. Kitchen cabinets he installed last spring. A home filled with 27 years of life. Birthday photos still lining the staircase wall. Within 7 minutes, flames had reached the attic. Within 12, the fire department arrived. By sunrise, half the structure was gone. The official report later listed the cause as an electrical fault inside the wall behind the laundry room. Aging wiring, likely sparked during a surge. Accidental, unavoidable, exactly the kind of situation insurance was meant for. Thomas had been paying premiums to Ridgeway Mutual Insurance for 14 years. Never missed a payment, never filed a claim. Until now, 3 days after the fire, he sat across from the insurance adjuster at a folding table set up in what remained of his living room. The adjuster, Paul Henley, was calm, professional, clipboard in hand. "We'll need a full inventory," Paul said. "Everything damaged or destroyed." Thomas nodded. He had already started writing it down. Furniture, appliances, electronics, roofing, structural framing, flooring, family heirlooms, tools in the garage. The total estimate from the independent contractor came in at $198,430. Rounded up, nearly $200,000 in covered damage. Paul walked through the debris, taking photos, measuring, writing notes. "It appears consistent with an electrical fire," he said at the time. Thomas felt relief for the first time since the blaze. Maybe this wouldn't be as hard as he thought. The denial letter arrived 3 weeks later. It was 7 pages long. The first 6 pages were policy language. The 7th page mattered. After careful review, Ridgeway Mutual Insurance has determined that the damage sustained to the property does not meet the conditions required for coverage under Section 4, Subsection 3B of the homeowner's agreement. Thomas read that sentence 5 times. It didn't make sense. He flipped back to his policy. Electrical fires were covered. Accidental fires were covered. Structural damage from internal faults was covered. He called immediately. After 18 minutes on hold, he reached a claims supervisor. "There appears to be confusion," Thomas said calmly. The fire marshal confirmed it was electrical. "Yes, Mr. Grayson," the supervisor replied. "However, our internal review suggests long-term deterioration contributed to the wiring failure." Thomas blinked. "I'm sorry. Deferred maintenance may void coverage in certain circumstances." Deferred maintenance. The phrase landed like a quiet accusation. "You're saying this is my fault?" "We're saying the policy excludes damage caused by preventable neglect." Thomas looked around at the charred remains of his home. The wiring had been behind drywall. Inside, insulation. Invisible. "How would I maintain wiring inside a wall?" he asked. The supervisor paused. "I understand this is frustrating, but the decision stands." Just like that. 14 years of premiums. 0 payout. Thomas didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He did something else. He requested every internal report, every inspection note, every photo taken by Ridgeway Mutual. If they were claiming neglect, he wanted proof. 2 weeks later, a digital folder arrived. Inside it were the adjuster's photos, the fire marshal's report, and something else, an internal engineering review. The review stated that signs of gradual insulation were visible during post-fire analysis, suggesting the wiring degradation occurred over time. Thomas enlarged the photos, zoomed in. He wasn't an engineer, but he noticed something strange. The insulation damage looked melted, not worn. Melted from heat. Heat caused by fire, not slow decay. He printed the images, laid them side by side. Something didn't add up. That's when he called an attorney. Her name was Rebecca Lawson, 54 years old, property litigation specialist, 29 years in courtrooms across the state. She didn't speak quickly. She didn't promise victories. She asked questions. How old was the wiring? Original to the house. Any prior electrical issues? None. Any inspection warnings in the last decade? No. Did they ever recommend rewiring? No. Rebecca nodded slowly. Insurance companies rely heavily on two things, she said. Policy language and hesitation. Hesitation. Most people assume denial means the end. Thomas leaned back in his chair. They said it was neglect. Rebecca held up one of the photos. Then we'll make them prove it. She requested Ridgeway Mutual's full underwriting file, maintenance history, previous internal evaluations, and deposition transcript from the engineer who wrote the review. Because if the denial hinged on long-term deterioration, someone would have to explain how they determined that from burned copper wiring. And that explanation would eventually happen under oath. Ridgeway Mutual responded the way large institutions often do. Slowly, formally, confidently. Their legal team argued the policy exclusion was clear. Preventable deterioration voided coverage. The internal engineer stood by his assessment. The damage showed signs of extended insulation breakdown. Case closed. Routine denial. Except it wasn't routine anymore. Because Rebecca noticed something in the engineer's credentials. He had never physically inspected the property. His conclusion was based solely on photographs. Photographs taken after the fire. Photographs showing melted wiring. Not aging. Not cracking. Melted. Rebecca filed suit. Claim amount, $200,000. Plus bad faith damages. Ridgeway Mutual didn't seem concerned. They had denied hundreds of claims before. Most homeowners folded. Most couldn't afford long legal fights. But Thomas wasn't asking for more than what his policy promised. And this time, the denial wasn't going to end with a letter. It was going to end in court. The courtroom was quieter than Thomas expected. No dramatic outbursts. No raised voices. Just wood-paneled walls, fluorescent lights, and two tables facing a judge who had seen hundreds of cases just like this. Ridgeway Mutual's legal team arrived with 3 attorneys. Dark suits, leather binders, confident posture. To them, this was a contractual dispute. To Thomas, it was his house. Ridgeway's lead attorney, Michael Trent, opened calmly. Your Honor, the policy clearly excludes losses resulting from long-term deterioration or preventable maintenance failures. Our engineering consultant determined that the wiring insulation showed progressive breakdown prior to the fire event. Clean, technical, controlled. He submitted printed enlargements of the wiring photographs. From a distance, they looked convincing. Darkened insulation, irregular edges. Aging, perhaps. Rebecca Lawson didn't object. She let him finish. Then she stood. Your Honor, the defendant's entire position rests on the assumption that post-fire melting equals pre-fire deterioration. She approached the evidence table. These photographs were taken after the structure was engulfed in flames reaching over 1,100 degrees Fahrenheit. She paused. Copper melts at approximately 1,984 degrees. Insulation fails much sooner. The judge glanced down at the exhibits. Rebecca continued. The engineer who concluded long-term deterioration never visited the property. He never inspected the breaker panel. He never tested the remaining circuits. His opinion was formed exclusively from images captured after catastrophic heat exposure. Michael Trent shifted slightly in his seat. Rebecca wasn't raising her voice. She didn't need to. The engineer was called to testify. Dr. Alain Bideger, mid-60s, gray hair, professional demeanor. He explained his credentials first. 30 years in electrical failure analysis. Hundreds of case evaluations. Then Rebecca began her cross-examination. Dr. Brewer, did you physically inspect the Grayson property? No. You based your opinion entirely on photographs. Yes. You concluded that insulation wear occurred gradually over time. Correct. Rebecca lifted one of the enlarged images. Can you point to visible cracking that predates thermal exposure? Dr. Brewer adjusted his glasses. The degradation pattern suggests visible cracking, doctor. A pause. Not conclusively visible, no. The courtroom remained silent. Rebecca moved to the next image. Is it possible that what you identified as deterioration is consistent with insulation shrinkage caused by intense heat? It's possible, he admitted. More than possible, Rebecca said softly. Probable. Michael Trent objected. Speculation. Sustained, the judge replied. Rebecca nodded and changed direction. Dr. Brewer, are you compensated by Ridgeway Mutual for claim evaluations? Yes. How frequently? Several dozen times per year. So, a significant portion of your professional income comes from insurance carriers. Yes. She let that settle. No accusation. Just math. But the real shift came during testimony from the fire marshal. Captain Daniel Ruiz had responded the night of the blaze. He testified that the origin point was a single junction box behind the laundry wall. There were no prior service calls, no code violations, no visible rodent damage, nothing suggesting homeowner neglect. Rebecca asked one more question. Based on your investigation, Captain, did you find evidence that the wiring failure was foreseeable to a reasonable homeowner? No, Ruiz said firmly. It was hidden inside the wall. That word lingered. Hidden. Ridgeway's attorneys maintained composure. Their argument remained the same. The policy language allowed discretion. Deterioration voided coverage, and determining deterioration involved expert judgment. They framed it as contractual interpretation. Nothing more. Nothing personal. Thomas sat quietly the entire time, hands folded, listening as lawyers debated whether his life reduced to ash qualified as covered loss. Then came closing arguments. Michael Trent stood again. Your Honor, insurance contracts are built on defined risk. If homeowners fail to maintain systems within their control, carriers cannot be held responsible. It sounded reasonable, measured. Rebecca stood last. This case is not about maintenance. It is about assumption. She walked toward the bench. The defendant assumed deterioration because it benefits them financially to do so. She held up the denial letter. They did not test. They did not inspect. They did not verify. A pause. They denied. The judge nodded once. He leaned back slightly. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he leaned forward, and that's when he asked the question. The judge leaned forward, hands folded loosely on the bench. For several seconds, he studied the photographs again. Then he looked directly at Ridgeway Mutual's lead attorney. Counsel, he said calmly, before issuing the denial, did your client perform any destructive testing on the remaining wiring to confirm long-term deterioration? The question sounded simple, technical, almost procedural, but the courtroom shifted. Michael Trent hesitated just slightly. Your Honor, the engineering consultant conducted a visual forensic review. The judge didn't interrupt. He simply waited. Michael continued. No destructive testing was performed. The judge turned a page in the file. So your client denied a $200,000 claim based solely on post-fire photographs, without opening the wall, without removing intact wiring sections for laboratory analysis, and without conducting any independent material testing. There it was. Not dramatic, not loud, but precise. Michael cleared his throat. That is correct, Your Honor. Thomas felt something change in the air. For months, the insurance company had spoken in confident absolutes. Deterioration, neglect, exclusion. Now those words felt thinner. The judge turned toward Dr. Brewer. Doctor, would destructive testing have provided a more definitive determination regarding pre-fire insulation condition? Dr. Brewer adjusted his posture. Yes, it likely would have. Was it requested? No. The judge nodded slowly. Then he looked back at Ridgeway's table. Help me understand something, he said evenly. If the exclusion hinges on long-term deterioration, and long-term deterioration requires confirmation beyond post-loss visual assessment, why was confirmation not obtained? Silence. Not hostile silence. Just absence of a good answer. Michael attempted recovery. Your Honor, industry standards allow for expert interpretation based on available evidence. The judge raised a hand slightly. I'm not asking about allowance. I'm asking about effort. That word landed harder than any objection. Effort. The courtroom remained still. When the ruling came 2 weeks later, it was 14 pages long. Measured, detailed, clinical. The judge wrote that insurance carriers have the right to investigate claims. But when invoking exclusions that place financial burden on the insured, those exclusions must be supported by substantial and reasonably verified evidence. He wrote that Ridgeway Mutual relied on inference rather than confirmation. He wrote that no testing was performed to distinguish thermal damage from gradual deterioration. And he wrote that denying a substantial claim without pursuing available verification methods constituted unreasonable claim handling. The denial was overturned. Ridgeway Mutual was ordered to pay the full $200,000 claim. But that wasn't the end. Because Rebecca had filed under bad faith statutes, the court found that the carrier failed to conduct a fair investigation before denying coverage. Additional penalties were imposed. Legal fees awarded. Interest accrued. The final total exceeded $310,000. The check arrived by certified mail. Thomas didn't open it immediately. He stood in the temporary rental house kitchen for a long moment, holding the envelope. 14 years of premiums. 6 months of uncertainty. One question from a judge. That's what it took. Not outrage. Not emotion. Not even accusation. Just precision. Why wasn't the wiring tested? That question forced Ridgeway Mutual to confront something they hadn't expected to defend. Not their policy language. Their process. Because insurance companies expect hesitation. They expect exhaustion. They expect homeowners to read denial letters and assume the decision is final. What they don't expect is scrutiny. In court, language matters, but effort matters more. Ridgeway Mutual framed the fire as preventable neglect. The court reframed it as unverified assumption. And that distinction changed everything. Thomas rebuilt. Not bigger, not grander, just solid. New wiring, new walls, same staircase, salvaged and restored. He kept every document from the case, every report, every photograph, not as proof of victory, but as proof of something else. Denial is not the same as decision, and authority is not the same as accuracy. The insurance company denied his $200,000 claim. They said the damage wasn't covered. He had photos. He had proof. But it took one question from a judge to expose everything.